I just want to start by saying that I have, where is Jenny? There in the back. I have a few Braille handouts, so if someone would need that, would you please raise your hand? And then I have to apologize because there won't be enough. Because I totally underestimated the amount of people that would be here. But Jenny will hand out, I think there are 5, so I apologize for those who don't get them. I will try to speak clearly anyhow. So, the photo in this first slide shows a young boy lying stretched out on his stomach in the grass on a nice summer's day. He's smiling and reading a Braille book, and I want this image to introduce the subject of my talk, which is titled Reading Development in 6 Students with Blindness or Severe Visual Impairment. And you heard I work at Resource Center Vision as a clinical psychologist, and I'm also a PhD student. And my research is about different aspects concerning the support to children with blindness and visual impairments with and without additional disabilities. And in this presentation, I will share some findings from one of my studies, which was a longitudinal study of reading development of children in inclusive education. This study was conducted in 2 phases. In phase 1, we followed an entire age cohort of Braille reading students during their first 3 years of school. And in phase 2, the concluding part of the study was initiated when the students had entered grade 9, which in Sweden is the last year of compulsory school. The aim of the total study was to examine the students' academic achievement, reading development, psychosocial situation, and experiences of support and accessibility from both teachers, parents, and students' perspectives. And the inclusion criteria for participating was that the student was starting first grade, a specific year, in regular compulsory school, and that the student was blind or had severe visual impairment and had been recommended Braille as their primary reading medium. 7 students spread all over the country matched these criteria, and we were very happy that they all consented to participating. So this study included all the Braille readers that specific year. And in the 9th grade, the 7 families were invited again to participate in the concluding part. And this time, 6 of them consented. So we have complete data on 6 out of 7 students. And in the 3rd slide, there is an overview of the participants, the 6 participants in the 9th grade. And I'll talk you through it. 4 students were blind, 2 were partially sighted. Visual disorders represented were congenital glaucoma, retinoblastoma, optic nerve hypoplasia in 2 cases, Leber's congenital amaurosis, and 1 unspecified retinal disease. The 2 students with glaucoma and retinoblastoma had cognitive abilities above average according to assessments. 1 student with optic nerve hypoplasia had an intellectual disability. The other one had average cognitive abilities and Asperger's syndrome. The 2 partially sighted students both had average cognitive abilities, and the one with Leber's also had an ADHD diagnosis. So the variation in this group, I would say, reflects the heterogeneity in the population of children with blindness or visual impairments, where we know that the prevalence of additional disabilities is high. This presentation will focus only on the students' reading development and pedagogical support. So the rest of the data I will leave out for now. And for the purpose of examining reading skills, I collected individual results from yearly reading observations conducted at Resource Center Vision, where I work, in grades 1 to 7, and also individual results from decoding tasks from the Swedish reading skills test LS, conducted by the students' ordinary teachers in grade 9. And in addition, semi-structured interviews were made with teachers, parents, and students in grades 1 to 3 and grade 9. So, what did we find? First of all, briefly, something about the support. The 6 families' experiences of the pedagogical support offered in the school varied greatly. In fact, the majority, 4 families, were not very satisfied with the support during compulsory school. Some of them even described an endless struggle for the right support. And these were mainly the families with children with additional disabilities, who had children who needed much support. One of these families chose to transfer their child to a special school at senior level because they were unhappy with the local schools. In contrast, 2 families were overall very pleased with the support throughout school, mainly because the schools had a very positive attitude and were creative in finding pedagogical solutions. These 2 students were also described as overall high achieving and independent, and this contributed to the positive outcome. Further on, it was evident that some teachers lacked sufficient knowledge about teaching methods for students with visual impairments, especially at senior level. And some also expressed that they didn't have sufficient Braille competence to support their students' reading. And these experiences, I think, are important now to keep in mind when we move on to looking at the data from the individual reading developments of the students. All 6 students started out as emerging Braille readers, but their reading development then took very different directions. I've grouped the 6 students into 3 pairs. The high achievers were 2 blind students who both developed good, in one case excellent, reading skills. These students were also generally high achieving and also had received good support. The strugglers were 2 other blind students. These 2 had extensive problems with their reading, and both of them had additional disabilities and had received poorer support. Finally, we have the 2 partially sighted students. These 2 students both gave up Braille and started to read print only at different stages, as it seemed mainly due to issues with identity and motivation. In spite of the fact that at least one of these students had a visual acuity so low that no one would have expected him to be able to read print. We will now look at each pair a little bit more closely. And we start with the high achievers. Student number 1, with congenital glaucoma, was a fluent Braille reader by the end of 1st grade. In the beginning, she was very motivated and showed a steady development. But at senior level, her motivation diminished. She started to use a combination of Braille and audiobooks, and clearly preferred audiobooks. Due to a lack of Braille practice, this led to a slight reduction of her reading speed, but at senior level she still read approximately 120 words per minute, and in the 9th grade she performed slightly below average at the decoding test compared to sighted readers. Student number 2 with retinoblastoma was a fluent Braille reader before starting school. She soon developed a reading speed at level with sighted readers, and at senior level she read about 160 words per minute and performed average at the LS decoding test in the 9th grade. This was a very motivated reader who read much in her spare time and also chose Braille over audio in school. And I want to share some glimpses from the interviews in the 9th grade. I asked student number 1, "Tell me about your reading habits at home and in school." "Well, at home I listen to audiobooks a lot. I guess I'm quite good at Braille reading, but I don't think Braille is fast enough. In school I have Braille books, but I really prefer listening. It's getting harder to keep up, and I guess it will be even harder in the university." I asked her teacher, "Does she like to read?" "She prefers listening. She thinks that she's slow when she reads Braille, so she doesn't like to read aloud in class. And since she prefers audiobooks, she doesn't practice Braille reading as much as she used to. Student number 2 said, I love reading. I read everything I can get my hands on. At home, I always have a Braille book going on, so I maintain my speed. That's important. But listening to audiobooks is nice too. What about in school, I asked. Do you use both audio and Braille? Mostly Braille. It works fine, and using headphones in the classroom feels a bit antisocial, I think. I asked her parents, does she read a lot at home? All the time, and we encourage it too, because we think good reading skills are very important. So those were the high achievers. We will now look at the strugglers. Student number 3, with optic nerve hypoplasia and intellectual disability, progressed very slowly, and in 3rd grade he could identify 2 Braille letters. This student attended 2 different local schools where the support was insufficient, and in 7th grade he transferred to the state special school for students with multidisability and visual impairment. Even though this student was reluctant to practice, in the new school he eventually learned to decode a few short words. Bless you. Student number 4, with optic nerve hypoplasia and Asperger's syndrome, also progressed slowly in her reading. Her problem was that she often got stuck on words and had trouble moving forward in texts, which led to a very slow and inefficient reading. At senior level, she read less than 50 words per minute and performed much below average on the LS decoding test. She also had poor reading comprehension. This student received extra training, but her motivation was low and the teacher had limited Braille competence. I asked the teacher of student number 3 with an intellectual disability, what are your reflections about his reading? Well, he's not really interested, and he's quite reluctant to use his hands, so it's hard. We have struggled, and he has made some progress, but it's difficult to know how much effort you should put into it. He has so many basic things to learn, so is Braille reading really worth prioritizing? I asked student number 4, how is Braille reading working for you now? Not so well, she said. I'm very slow, and if there's a lot of text, I fall so much behind because it takes too long for me. So I mainly listen, otherwise it would be impossible. I asked her parents, do you practice Braille at home together? Well, we try, but she has so much homework and she struggles so hard, so we don't want to force her. And finally, we have the partially sighted students. Student number 5 had Leber's and ADHD. He was recommended Braille due to a very low visual acuity, 0.04. He progressed slowly in his Braille reading, and in 7th grade he read about 70 words per minute, but with good comprehension. However, this student's motivation for Braille gradually diminished as he wanted to read like everyone else, as he expressed. So in 8th grade, he decided not to use Braille in school anymore. Eventually, he became a quite fast print reader despite his low visual acuity, performing average at the LS test in print in 9th grade. And student number 6, finally, had a retinal disease and was recommended Braille due to low vision and oculomotor problems. However, this student was from the beginning very visually motivated and learned to read print by own effort alongside Braille. Since he made no progress in Braille, it was redecided that he should focus on only print after 3rd grade. This student didn't become a very fast reader in print either. In the 9th grade, he performed below average on the LS test in print. I asked student number 5, do you read Braille in school at all now? No, none at all. Only print now. I only read texts on my computer screen. I don't want to read Braille anymore. And I asked his parents, why do you think he doesn't want to read Braille in school anymore? Well, they said, there have been so many technical problems and he received poor support with that. And then, well, I guess the main reason is that he doesn't want to deviate from the norm. He wants to be like the others. I asked his teacher, how is reading working for him since he stopped using Braille? Actually, he reads print quite fast, but he has to sit very close to the screen, and that's extremely tiresome for him, which also accentuates his attention problems. But it's what he wants, and I think that he feels much more participatory now when he doesn't have to read Braille. And I asked student number 6, why did you stop using Braille? And he said, because I wanted to read normally. Can you describe what happened? Thank you. I was wondering where you were waving. Because I wanted to read normally. Can you describe what happened when he stopped using Braille? Well, it was a huge lift for him, said the parents, when he wasn't forced to use Braille anymore. And I think it's interesting in some of the quotations, some quite strong words are used concerning attitudes towards Braille. Forced, have to, normally, etc. So, what can we say about factors that might have influenced these students' reading development? Of course, many factors, both individual and environmental, needs to be considered. On an individual level, I firstly want to point to the possible importance of the etiology of the visual impairment, brain involvement or not, as well as the presence of additional disability, general cognitive level, motivation, and also possible emotional vulnerability. Concerning environmental factors, of course, there's the quality of pedagogical support and the teacher's varying knowledge in Braille, as well as the quantity of regular practice, both in school and at home, to maintain skills and speed, as we have heard also today. And I also want to point to the importance of the attitudes from teachers and peers and attitudes and support from parents. Is Braille considered something positive and normal, or is it something negative that you're forced to do? All these aspects play together, I think, and are important for their development. So, to summarize, the outcome of these students' reading development was strikingly different for various reasons. First, I want to point to the fact that the heterogeneity of the population of Braille reading children must be considered when planning how to support both their reading and their general achievement and learning. All blind children are not the same. One size does not fit all. Further on, some teachers clearly lacked enough Braille competence, thus more education to teachers is necessary. Also, these results, together with clinical experience, imply that partially sighted students may be extra vulnerable to peers' attitudes. They want to be like everyone else and might have a resistance towards Braille, even though they may actually need it. These students need to be paid special attention so they can be supported properly in their reading development and also in their identity. And I also want to raise a question about Braille readers with intellectual disability or other additional disabilities, such as autism, for example. Sometimes it seems to be a tendency to consider Braille a non-priority for these children. Blind children with low cognitive abilities may therefore lack the opportunity to learn to master reading skills to at least some level, since the environment maybe don't put enough effort into it. So this matter needs to be addressed, I think. In conclusion, motivation, competence, and attitudes are some of the key factors for Braille reading students' opportunities to master and develop their skills. And here's a photo of 6 students reading a book, or maybe 5. They're reading the same book, one in Braille and one in print. And I want to let this image of a positive, inclusive reading activity end my speech. And I will also mention that if you're dying to read more about this study, there are 2 publications which I'm happy to email to you or to give you, because I brought some paper copies with me if you approach me. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Kim, and also thank you for finishing my introduction by telling us where you're from. So thank you very much. I'm sorry about that. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anything? Okay, so I have a question. My student. Oh, okay. Oh. No. You go first.
Hi, thank you. It was very interesting. So I wanted to ask, how do you reflect upon the idea that it wasn't really the children's decision to quit Braille, it was rather the attitudes imposed on them by their parents, who kind of seemed to regard it a bit abnormal?
I don't think that was the reason. I think there are multifactorial explanation to that, because to my experience, I think many of you recognize it, these children often struggle harder in this sense than the blind children, because the partially sighted children have more identity issues, because they can do almost the same as their sighted peers, but not everything. And considering the reading medium, Braille becomes maybe a symbol for deviation for some of these. And this maybe can be reinforced by attitudes from parents and others in the environment.
Okay,
I think.
Okay. Other questions before I say mine? So I'd like to know what the competence is for teachers. I mean, what would we have expected for the teachers?
Don't get me started. No, but I think I can only speak for the system we have in Sweden, where there is a completely different system than what you have, for example, in the United States, and in Canada, I don't know, and in other countries, because since other of my colleagues have talked about in different sessions, the everyday practice, the responsibility for everyday practice with these children lie on the ordinary teachers, and we don't have vision teachers coming out. We have a special uppdrag, Anders, in English, the Braille assignment. Thank you, Kia. To support the teachers, but it's still not enough, even though we have courses and we come out and do different interventions. I think, I mean, if you go to research and read about this, the success comes from a curriculum where you get support more frequently during the course of compulsory school from someone who knows this. So the resources are too limited, I would say. So because the competence is both experience and theoretical, of course, learning and everyday practice. But it's difficult when you meet one of these students once in your career and get limited support. Yeah. So there's much to say about that, but I won't do that now.
I would suspect that there's much to say worldwide about that.
Yes,
so
I know.
It is an issue that we struggle with, I think, around the world. So anyway, thanks very much. That was very interesting. So we'll have a brief transition to our next speaker.